So we're up to part 2 of the Killers of the Flower Moon, which is actually around, I think we're starting around like chapter 3 now. We're at the third chapter of Synopsis. And it's a really long book, but because it's long because so many murders happened, and to get to the killer, it really is a whodunit, and it's all true. Like, in case this is a true story, this is how the FBI got started and everything. This is true. These Indians were rich like this, and these white people did marry into their families so that they could marry into the bloodlines and receive the inherited mineral rights that they had by birth. So let's just get into the rest of it because we got a lot to cover. He begins taking matters into his own hand and soon comes to the belief that Lizzie died of poisoning. Bill is certain that all 3 deaths, Lizzie's, Anna's, and Whitehorn's, are all connected to the Asagi's subterranean reservoir of black gold. Molly was just 10 years old when the oil was first discovered, but the tangled history of how the Asagi came to live on their oil-rich land goes back hundreds of years. In the 17th century, the Asagi had laid claim to a large part of the central United States, a territory stretching from what is now Missouri to Kansas to Oklahoma and beyond, out as far west as the Rockies. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson in the Louisiana Purchase obtained lands dominated by the Asagi, and in 1804, Jefferson met with the Asagi chiefs and compelled them to relinquish much of their territories, threatening them with being seen as enemies of the United States if they did not comply. The Asagi were forced to cede nearly hundreds of millions of acres of ancestral land, and then made their way to a 50 by 125 mile area in southeastern Kansas. Molly's mother and father came of age in this place in the mid-1940s. They grew up steeped in tribal traditions, and most of the tribe refused to adopt the white man's ways. The Asagi were promised that the Kansas territory would be theirs forever, but soon they were again under siege by settlers. And in 1870, the Asagi were again forced to sell off their lands for $1.25 an acre. Impatient settlers mutilated and massacred the Asagi, and then ensuing violence led an Indian Affairs agent to ask, which of these people are the savages? The Asagi purchased 1.5 purchase. You hear that? The Asagi purchased 1.5 million acres of region in south of Kansas, and because the territory was so hilly, many Asagi believed that the government would not force them to move again. They set up camp, establishing their largest base in Pawhuska. Lizzie and her husband, who went by his Asagi name, Nakasise, settled there in 1874. Their tribe's numbers had dwindled to a third of what they were at the turn of the century, and the American buffalo population, which the Asagi hunted and used for food, clothing, bowstrings, and more, had virtually been eradicated in a systematic plot by settlers who knew that every buffalo dead is an Indian gone. As settlers strove to assimilate and let's read that again. As settlers strove to assimilate and indoctrinate the Asagi tribe, Molly's parents struggled to hold on to their customs. When Molly and her sisters were born in the 1800s, they were all given traditional Asagi names. Settlers in Pawhuska, Gray Horse, and the surrounding areas refused to recognize those names. However, and soon everyone in Molly's family had an English name. And in 1894, Molly and her sisters enrolled in a Catholic school, which has a 2-day journey by wagon from their home. Their parents worried that if they didn't comply with the edicts compelling Asagi to send their children to such schools, the government would withhold the annuity payments on the Kansas land. At school, Molly was forced to remove her traditional tribal clothing, including her Indian blanket, and dress in a plain frock, a dress. She was forbidden from speaking Asagi and forced to learn English as her education began. An education meant to transform her into what authorities conceived as the ideal woman. Molly submitted to her training and in the domestic arts. And as the years went on, Molly and her fellow students exchanged their traditional clothing for customs and assimilated white clothing and their behaviors. Molly submitted to her training in the domestic arts. And as the years went on, Molly and her fellow students exchanged their traditional clothing and customs for assimilated white clothing and behaviors. By the late 1890s, the government's assimilation campaign was still not over. The Asagi Reservation was about to be divided up into 160-acre parcels, with each tribal member receiving one allotment, while the rest of the territory was open to settlers. The Asagi knew from the division and the allotment of the Cherokee territory was not far away, and things could get dangerous. When the Cherokee land was parceled up in September of 1893, a land rush began, and tens of thousands of white settlers arrived to claim their parcels of land in a violent, chaotic maelstrom. So I want you to pay attention. You didn't hear anybody say that they paid them for anything. The Asagi chief James Bigheart worked tirelessly to forestall all process of allotment, but by 1904, the government was planning on breaking up the Indian Territory and making it a part of a new state, Oklahoma. The Asagi were able to convince the government to allot each tribal member a larger parcel of land, thus reducing the chance of a mad dash on their territory, and also slipped what seemed like at the time a curious provision into the agreement that the oil, gas, coal, and other minerals beneath the land itself would be reserved for the Asagi themselves. Let me read that again. The Asagi were able to convince the government to allot each tribal member a larger parcel of land, thus reducing the chance of a mad dash on their territory, and also slipped what seemed like at the time a curious provision into that agreement, that the oil, gas, coal, and other minerals beneath the land itself would be reserved for the Asagi themselves. Now, that's what I was referring to when I said the mineral rights. Okay. The tribe was aware of the oil deposits on their reservation and wanted to ensure that their interests were protected. Under the terms of the Allotment Act, each member of the Asagi tribe was given a head right, a share of the tribe's mineral trust. When members of the tribe sold their land once Oklahoma entered the Union, they could make money off the surface land but retain the mineral trust. No head rights could be bought or sold. They could only be inherited. Now, I want you to keep in mind how smart they had to be to think of this ahead of time. And then I want you to think about, regardless of how smart, what the outcome was. Okay. The tribe began soon leasing areas to white prospectors for exploration. The young I know too many Haitian guys. The young Jean Paul Getty, who would one day found the Getty Oil Company, was there as a boy with his father on a quest for oil. One spring day in 1917, a rig hit a large oil deposit and oil blasted up from the earth like a huge dark column. By 1920, Burbank, one of the highest producing oil fields in the country, was tapped. Its well generated 680 barrels in its first 24 hours of operation. As apathetic investigators in Asagi County failed to look into Lizzie's suspicious death and make no headway in either Anna Brown's or Charles Whitehorn's murder investigations, both families turned to the only means at their disposal: money. Molly offers up to $2,000 cash reward for any information leading to the arrest of those responsible for Anna's death, and the Whitehorn family offers $2,500. William Hale promises his own reward as well. When Sheriff Frias is charged with willfully failing to enforce the law by Oklahoma Attorney General for his permission of bootlegging and gambling, Hale decides to take things in his own hands and hires a private eye. Hale recruits a brooding detective from Kansas City who goes by the name of Pike. Anna's estate, meanwhile, is being administered by Scott Mathes, owner of the Big Hill Trading Company. The U.S. government, believing that most Asagi, listen to this, that most Asagi are incapable of handling their own money, has over the years required the Office of Indian Affairs to determine which members of the tribe are capable of handling their own trust funds, and assign local white guardians to the remaining members